Morning, Matt. Good to see you.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing okay. I'm excited to learn about creative problem solving. We've talked about it a lot, but every time we talk about it, I learn something from you. This is absolutely in your wheelhouse. So happy to share what I've learned too, or observed, but very, very interested in delving into this together.
Cool. All right, let's go.
All right. So creative problem solving. You've developed a course. It's going to launch soon on this topic. It is one of the constituencies I work with is college students, and they're often thinking about their career. And if you ask people out in the work world, what is the thing that you want graduating college students to have, is to be able to solve problems, and in particular, creative problems that require creative thinking, transfer, innovation, insight, and in the world of AI, maybe even more so, where the human capacity to gain insight could be even more important. But in any case, so that's one backdrop, the utility of creative problem solving. But so what is creative problem solving from your vantage point? And I know you have a distinctive one.
Yeah, so I think we have to let's parse the words a little bit and first look at problem solving, that we are problem solvers. We're throughout the day we faced a myriad of inconveniences, challenges, obstacles, and we handle them easily, readily. From experience, we classify a problem, oh, this is what happened last time, and off we go. And so in that sense, that is not creative problem solving. That's just kind of routine problem solving. And what I would say is those are problems we solve from a certain perspective that's gained through experience. And from that experience, we can classify these problems and thus create solutions quite easily. And that's great. I mean, that's an efficient way to go about life. But then we hit these challenges, these roadblocks that challenge that perspective, that don't seem easily definable or reducible to solutions that we've used before. So that's where creative problem solving comes in. So the creative problem solving, if we look at the word creative, does not mean that you have to be a poet, an amazing musician, or a painter, all those which I'm not. That's not what we mean by creative. Creative just means someone who can think of innovative solutions when readily available solutions just won't cut it. So that's my roundabout way of creative problem solving is. So to put it into a sentence, which I probably won't do, is to say, it's the ability to solve sticky problems. How's that?
Yeah, one thing that came out that
I
hadn't thought of before in our conversations is, and it harkens to something we've talked about a lot before, and maybe be an entree into the model. I don't know if you're ready to get into that,
Sure.
But your conceptual model. But it seems to me that there's actually an important step that I never thought of, which is the problem solver needs to gain awareness that they're not in a routine situation, and say, oh yeah, this problem is not subject to my routine ways of approaching problems. And there's a moment of awareness there that I need to do something different. And maybe that is in the model and I just didn't hit me the same way. But we've talked so much about awareness as a key component of the approach we're trying to advocate, and even a strategy. So that's my observation. What's the role of awareness and how does it fit into the model?
Sure. Yeah, so that's a big issue going back in philosophy for centuries, was how can you even know you have a problem? Because as soon as you know you have a problem, you should know the solution to that problem, if that makes sense. This is back to Plato and others, Socrates, and a philosopher that I've studied, a guy named Michael Polanyi, felt that he had solved that problem by, he had this little pithy statement that you know more than you know. I'm gonna take it wrong. You know more than you can say, basically. That there's only so much that you can conceptualize. There's more to our awareness than what we can break down in terms of conception. So what did he mean by that? And basically, we tend to prioritize what we can rationalize, speak about in some kind of discursive manner. And he said there is this other level we can call the subconscious, or part of the subconscious called the tacit dimension, that is kind of the meaning maker machine of human, and he really focused on that. And what's going on there is when you come across something, a challenge, initially, I think we do try to have it conform or place it within our ruling perspective, which we're not necessarily aware of. We just kind of, from experience and kind of habitually, we just kind of take this and say, oh, this is this problem and this is how to solve it. Because again, that's efficient. And so there's kind of a Procrustean bed there going on, right? So you have this problem, it's got to conform to my perspective. But then through frustration or just the inability to solve this problem, you realize, oh, there's something more going on. So that's one possibility. Another is just this gut feeling that there's something more, like that this problem somehow challenges my perspective. And that awareness hasn't really been discussed a lot. I mean, this is where I kind of go back to Jean Piaget's work on cognitive development, where it's not a linear growth, there's these jumps, and we don't realize that there's frustrations, there's some discord before there's a jump. And we kind of say, oh, isn't it great, we kind of jump from this level of cognition and awareness to, or kind of understanding of the world, to a greater one through these jumps. We don't realize, okay, there's this point where there's frustration because our ruling perspective is limited, and we somehow deep down know that. We know that there's a bigger world out there, and so that dissonance creates this I hate to say introspection, but it puts in process that we can talk about a little bit, where we will ultimately make a jump into a higher plane of awareness and a perspective that takes in more of the world than previously.
So this obstacle, this thing that's insurmountable by our routinized ruling perspective, we maybe tried a few times, and we say at some point we have some kind of initial awareness, hey, this doesn't work. That evokes some kind of different process,
right?
Not retrieving the tool that I've used before, but like, oh, that doesn't work, and so then I have a different process that goes on. And you said you're reluctant to, I think, call it introspection, but there's something happening.
Yep.
That's qualitatively different, and maybe also qualitatively different in terms of our awareness of it. Is that right?
Say that again. Like, so there's something
we're qualitative in terms of our awareness of the process that are being stuck, this solving process or resolution or whatever that is. We're not aware of it maybe in the same way as we're aware that, hey, this isn't working.
I guess so. I'm not quite following, to be honest.
Yeah, and maybe it's a dead end. But we're kind of keeping the theme of awareness.
Yeah.
It seemed to me that
well, I mean, let me put it this way.
Go ahead.
So I think there's for an infant or growing child, there's probably a bit more there's a bit more wonder and exploration given the right circumstance. I'm not saying this is always the case for every, but for most kids though, it's there's this, they will follow they will make these jumps into higher cognition based on Piaget's stratification of cognitive development. Whereas as we get older, I think we perhaps lose a bit of that wonder and excitement about a world being bigger, and that world becomes a bit more of a threat. So that awareness isn't like, oh, exciting, I've got this great challenge and I can grow my perspective. That challenge becomes more likely a threat, and that's the fight, flight, freeze response that we often talk about. So that is a type of awareness that we're perhaps less inclined to embrace this challenge and learn and grow from it and want to grow from it, versus okay, we're kind of comfortable in our perspective and kind of our habits, and it's the way we've adapted to the world. And so who wants to go through all this energy and uncertainty about blowing that all up and going to a different perspective? That just I think it can potentially get harder and harder to do that.
So right, the threat becomes a kind of obstacle. So say some more about the threat. So I'm thinking a threat to our self-concept, threat to my sense of I'm good at this, I should be able to do this, a threat to my perspective. There's also material, I think, in our world often right now, the problems we face, let's say in a work or school environment, there's often a time component. Like, I don't have time for this. I have to get, this is the exploration and investigation I would need to solve this problem, is time taken away from doing the thing that I need to turn in by this thing to get the grade that I want. And so it's a threat to our material advancement or our security. I don't, is that the kind of threat you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think, well, this is where ultimately it's a threat to ourselves and our self-worth and our self-identity. And this is where this idea of self-relationality, which I think we've talked about here, I know that's something we talk about all the time, where we are always in the process of defining and protecting our sense of self-worth, even when we're not consciously aware of it. And in fact, every decision, every thought, and every action is involved in that process. And so, and we often, and I would say most of the time, are not consciously aware of that. And so it's easy to forget that that's in play. So in these types of challenges, we're not saying, we don't go, oh, wait a minute, my self-worth is at risk here, or my sense of who I am. It's more like, oh, we just have that awkwardness and unease of the uncertainty and the fear, and that's what we're experiencing,
right?
And we don't like it, so we're trying to get rid of it at any cost. So that's one thing. And then secondly, as you said, yeah, it takes a lot of energy, and it's risky, and when we're so busy, it's like, I don't have time for this, like if you're a student in college for the first year and you've got 300 pages to read and 4 problem sets and midterms coming up, and you're like, I just got to go with what I know. I don't have time to be thinking about how do I reinvent myself and go about learning how to learn differently. In the same way as if you're in the working world, you're a manager or just starting out. Yeah, it's like you're overwhelmed. You got all this, input coming in, and you just got to somehow survive. So it's easy just to go into survival mode.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think that's the being a creative problem solver can seem incredibly inefficient and inconvenient in that sense,
and even unrealistic. I mean, so one thing, again, we've talked about this many times, but another insight that I'm having is thinking through the lens of college students and the transition to college and what that's like. And something I've been thinking about lately is even the conception, the view. We were talking about this. We kind of hold on to a view of ourselves, but also in this case, what's the view of education? So what's education for? So I think more and more we see college students seeing college or university as transactional rather than transformational. So if you believe that, no, college is meant to be an instrument, a pathway, a ladder for me to get a job. That's what it does. If the class or the education or the requirements don't do that, then it's failing me. It's wrong. It's mistaken. It's inefficient. But if you have the idea that, which I think many educators have, or hopefully they have, is that especially college is transformational. You change. That's what it's about. That's what it's for. And you change in practical ways, but you change in more fundamental ways. So change is a different process. So if So if you say, oh, this work, these demands, these opportunities are meant to change me, they're not that fundamental starting point of what is education, what's it for? It's to change me, versus it's meant to be a ladder to get to where I want to go. Then it seems to me that directly informs how you interpret this challenge. You would see it as a threat to the ladder, to get the grade, to get the rather than an obstacle to get the achievement, to put it on my resume, to get the internship, which is real. I understand that from a student's point of view. I'm not denigrating that. Versus, oh, this is a desirable difficulty. This is in fact how I'm going to acquire the skills and knowledge that allow me to make an impact in the world and be materially successful. That foundational frame or starting point of what's education for, transactional or transformational, seems to me to be really basic. And I'm just seeing it more and more. There's lots of data that shows students are coming to college much less frequently with colleges for me to figure out how to live my life, rather than much more colleges to help me get a good job.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I just, as you're speaking, well, I want to address what you said, but also prior to that, when we talk about creative problem solving, I don't want to make it where you go through this massive existential crisis and you've got to leave college and go to India for a year to find yourself. I mean, that's not what we're saying. It's just, again, it's the fact that we are always with ourselves and we are always grappling with who we are and our self-worth and, meaning and purpose. So we're just trying to hold that. We need to keep that at the forefront, because when you come to college and you have this opportunity for transformation, we often go into self-protective mode. And we do that because we're trying to hold on to our sense of who we are and what we value or think will bring us self-worth. So, a lot of students, as you know, are on the belief that, that I need to get these grades so that I can get this internship and then get this job. And then, somehow the mountain I'm climbing will somehow lead to this great life. So again, they were on this journey to get into a good college or a college. And now they're there, and now it's like, okay, now I got to start over. And I thought that was a mountain, but now I see an even bigger mountain than in front of me, so I got to climb that one. So it's like, okay, I need to do what I've always done, which is perhaps grind and the way to. And so it's easy to say transformation. That's, what do you mean? Like I got to get those good grades, so I can't put that at risk. Because there's so much at stake, because the internship and grad school and the jobs are contingent on that. So, so it can seem like it's that the idea of transformation itself is a threat, or as you said, it's just not practical.
Yeah, students will say it's a luxury.
Luxury. Yeah, I like that even better.
So grades are a necessity. Learning is a luxury. Learning stands in the place of transformation. And then that way of thinking is based on a set of beliefs and values. And I would say one is something like, once I'm successful by these certain metrics, then I will be happy.
Right.
I will have a happy, in a broad sense, life. And that but the model they have often puts them on what's sometimes called the hedonic treadmill. That if that's the case, the goal, hitting the goalpost of the finish line just leads you to create a new finish line. And that state of that gap is often unpleasant. But I think, for me, the point, just to circle back, the point isn't that education should only be transformational. It shouldn't, that I'm advocating to forget about grades. That's not my position. My position is that if it's a single-minded focus on that you will actually not be happy and you won't get much out of it.
Yep.
And in fact, it won't help you get to where you want to go. And I don't want to go too far down this path, but sometimes when students, rightfully challenge this position, I'll say, okay, imagine 10 years from now, you're on the table, not as the interviewee, but the interviewer. And you're in a position to hire somebody. You started a business, you're in a position of management, supervision, you're hiring somebody, and you're also on this side of the table. Do you care what their grades are or what they learned how to do? And they always say, learn how to do. But you're focused on the grades, not what you're learning how to do, which would require a transformation. So there's a tension and a disconnect there. And I think it's by virtue of this view. I have to please these people to get in, and the thing they think is going to please them is extracurriculars and grades,
Right.
Which makes sense because that's how they got in. But in any case, I don't want to get too far down that because we have a lot to
No,
yeah.
I mean, it's a good point. I like, as you said in the beginning, most employers want someone who is a creative problem solver. I mean, that's one of the NACE. I can't even remember what it stands for. National Association of College, and I don't know. Basically,
Okay.
it's one of the big like everyone in the career services department of every college belongs to NACE, and there's a couple other ones, but they put out an annual list of the top 10 skills employers want, and right at the top is they don't say creative problem solving, but basically that's what they mean. Someone, they want people who can work in teams, have that high emotional intelligence, but also they talk about computer skills and communication skills, but the ability to handle new and difficult situations is right there at the top. So creative problem solving is a really important skill. And I think in our, like you said, AI, but it just, our world is, it's just changing so rapidly, and the speed, the rapidity is growing. So it's accelerating. So, the ability to really not freak out and not take a Procrustean approach is really important, because that's the only way businesses survive and grow in such an environment.
You just for our younger listeners, you may need to define Procrustean.
Oh, the Greek. Gosh, I can't remember the story. So
Maybe any listener.
Yeah, well, there's I would say is Procrusteus. Is that is that was his name? Or well, they basically had this bed, and it was a bed of nails, and he would just put people on it, and then he would chop off your whatever was hanging out. So a Procrustean bed is this bed that you're basically making people conform to this perspective. That's the Procrustean bed.
Yeah. And very rigid, unchanging,
right.
Not malleable. So this idea that a powerful force for the individual, but also for society, is that you have to fit. And then that fit, the need for that fit, often, if I can elaborate, is in tension often with our own authenticity or growth or change or fluidity.
Yeah. Well, and I think where we see a good example of this is in the workplace. Let's say you had a supervisor or director who was innovative 5-10 years ago, but they're still saying, oh, that's how to solve the same problems today. And you're like, no, we need to change. We need to do this a little differently. We need to integrate AI in a responsible way, whatever. And the director's like, no, this is how, this worked so great. Every time I've done it in the past, it worked great. That's a Procrustean bed. They're just saying that problem or that opportunity is the same that we experienced 5-10 years ago. And so we just apply the same solution, when that is not the case, that things have evolved, they've changed significantly. So we have to think of new and innovative ways to go about, implementing whatever. So
I think it's a good segue into, so how does one make that shift? How does one come up with and create innovative solutions to non-routine problems?
So, well, let me do that through just kind of briefly mentioning the rubric that we discussed in the course, because it's actually two separate issues. Like we use the rubric to kind of show where we get stuck, and then the question is, well, what's going to motivate you to embrace this approach to creative problem solving? Does that make sense? How there's so let me do the
so getting stuck, and then what motivates you to get unstuck yourself?
Yeah, or and I guess all right, let me just talk about the rubric that we go through. It was developed by a guy named Jim Loder, who was a psychologist, turned philosopher, then turned theologian. He taught at Princeton Theological Seminary for years and years. I studied under him. I had the pleasure of being one of the last ones to work with him before his untimely death in 2001. Incredible man, and it's interesting for those who know him. Tremendous respect. I mean, there's an awe about him, but he's not well known. So there's a small circle of folks who just we adore, I would say, him as a person, and appreciate his work. Anyway, he had a book called Transforming Moment. And in there, he developed what he called transformational logic. It was a 5-step approach. And I'll give it to you briefly. The first one is that there's a conflict. You recognize that there's an issue or problem, which I think is okay. We all know that. You just sense this problem. Now here, before you move on to the second point, the problem has to be significant enough for you that you're willing to invest time and energy in it. So that's a big point. Sometimes we come across problems that are kind of trivial, and so we just kind of forget about it. You think about, oh yeah, I can't remember that person's name or whatever, and it's not a big issue, so you just let it go. But also, the problem here can be so significant that it is a threat, and so you do anything you can to get rid of it, to get rid of the problem, to resolve it somehow. And so this is where we have the fight, flight, or fear, fight, flight, or freeze response. And we spent some time in the course talking about how each of those are fear responses. Obviously, it's pretty easy to see the freeze response because you're just so paralyzed, you don't know what to do. Flight, right? You're just going to run away from the problem. It doesn't exist. Do whatever you can. That's easy. But I think you have to see that the fight response is also a fear-based response. I don't think people would think that, but and it's fascinating to come across people like this. I'm sure you have come across people like this, Nick, who are fighters. When there's a conflict or whatever, they get aggressive. They are kind of, bullies, and they are trying to eliminate the problem, and they have a fear-based response. And so they're still trying to eliminate the problem. They just doing it in their own ways of doing it, which is like an aggressive attack mode. And okay, so that's typically how we try to get rid of problems. Ones, they're just trivial, it's not worth it. That's not a time where you need creative problem solving. There are times when you do need creative problem solving, but your tendency is to protect yourself out of the fear of uncertainty through fight, flight, freeze, and the multitude of ways that can manifest itself. Okay, so let's say the next step is what's called interlude for scanning, and this is kind of the weird one that people who come up with rubrics for creative problem solving, this never comes up. Basically, what it says is that there is that initial time where you're thinking through a problem and you're thinking through solutions and nothing really comes to mind. You actually have to let go of the problem, consciously let it go, and when you let it go, it doesn't go away. It just goes down into your subconscious, what we referred to earlier as the tacit dimension. Now, this is one of those things where these dimensions of the human being that you can never really look at it. You only just see the manifestations of it, if that makes sense. So
can you say that again?
So you never see the tacit dimension in action. It's subconscious. It's below awareness. And the example that I give is to kind of not prove, but make it believable that this dimension exists in us, is that we've all had that experience where you're at a party or some event, or you're walking down the street and someone across the street says, hey Nick, how's it going? And or hey Matt, and you're like, hey buddy, you can't remember their name, and you're like, who's this person? I can't, I should know them, they know me. You're rifling through your Rolodex in your head and nothing comes through. For younger listeners, Rolodex was the old contacts on your phone. You actually had like this, it was a little thing that had all your contacts. Anyway, So you can't remember who they are, and then at some point you let go of like you just get on with your day. But then like an hour, 2 hours, next day, all of a sudden you're like, oh, you kind of remember who this person is. That tells you that the problem did not go away, even though you weren't consciously aware. It went somewhere, and you were still, some wheels were turning trying to figure this out. And I would say that's the tacit dimension. And the tacit dimension, and I won't go too much into it, is kind of the meaning-making machine of human experience. So the example I give in the course, just to talk about the tacit dimension in action, is driving a car. So when you first learn to drive a car, you're sitting down and you're kind of freaking out because you're in this huge machine, and you've got to somehow navigate it on a road with other cars and parked cars and people crossing the road and everything. And the sensory input is just overwhelming, right? Every bump, every noise, everything is, you don't know how to process it, and you're aware of it, right? But over time, without you consciously being aware of it, all those bumps and vibrations that you're just feeling through your feet, your hands, and your backside from sitting in the seat, all those start to take on meaning. They become all of a sudden you're like, oh, that I just went over a pothole. The right front wheel just went over a pothole. You wouldn't have known that initially when you started off, but over time, all those sensory inputs take on meaning. They become part of a broader, bigger experience, if that makes sense. So something in you is doing that, and that is the tacit dimension. It's creating meaning out of all these sensory inputs. So that's one way to talk about the tacit dimension. Now, why that's important is that you have to give space or time for the tacit dimension to do its work when you are facing these big challenges. What we tend to do, if we are willing to stay with the problem, or the problem is big enough and it that we can't really get away from it, we tend to obsess about it, right? And we're anxious. We stay up at night. We're going through all these scenarios of how could this work out and everything. We're not letting go of the problem, and thus, and because it's still in our focal awareness in our front of our of our minds, we're not allowing the tacit dimension to do its work. So can you not only stay with the problem, but let the problem go and trust yourself to think through and come up with a good solution through the tacit dimension giving its work. So that's step 2, is this interlude for scanning. Can you provide yourself or have confidence in yourself enough to allow this interlude between sensing the problem and coming up with a solution for scanning, the tacit dimension doing its scanning and come up with a creative solution. All right, so step 3 is when the tacit dimension kind of puts together or comes to what it believes to be a workable, efficacious solution. It will try to get your attention through some creative act of the imagination. Like if you're trying to remember someone's name, sometimes you will all of a sudden, like a past memory of that person will come to mind. It'll be like, oh, that's Bob, or that's Nick, or that's Mary. So it's trying to get it's throwing the issue back up into your focal awareness, and through your imagination, you start to focus on it. And then step 4 is this kind of that what's called release of energy. All that energy yourself put into solving the problem at the tacit dimension is released, and this is that aha eureka moment, and there's this sense of relief. You kind of feel really good. You're like, oh, this is great. That the world's a better, bigger, safer place, and there's a growth in your self-esteem. And then the 5th step after that is, even when you have that kind of aha moment, there's still that want to verify it, to make sure it's a workable solution. So you'll often, I give the example of coding, like, because I do a fair amount of coding, and you come across bugs, and I get, you try all these things, and you spend an hour, and you can't figure it out, and then I'll take a walk. That's my way of creating an interlude for scanning. And then I'll go, oh wait a minute, what if I do this? And then I literally I'm like excited, I feel great, I'm and I run back to the computer and I have to verify it by actually doing the coding and see if it works. So that's the 5 steps of Loder's transformational logic, which is, to me, is just, and again, he is a way he applies it to kind of like growth in our psyches and growth as human beings, but it's applicable to all dimensions of human endeavor. So that was a long explanation. I can't even remember the initial. I said there was 2 parts. That's the root.
Right.
Why would you even engage in this, right?
Right. The motivation to change, as I understood it.
Yeah, we go into that in the course, and because it seems like a lot, and we've talked about how our natural response is to avoid these types of uncertainty. And here I talked about, and we worked on this together with the scripts, that a couple things. One is are we really comfortable or content with where we are right now? Like students who are just grinding away, or folks in the working world just kind of grinding away, kind of doing what they do. There's something just inherently, I think, dissatisfying with that, or unsatisfying with that kind of life. And you're just trying to get through. And there's always a better life, is always kind of out there in the future. If we just keep grinding, we keep climbing that mountain, somehow we're going to get there, but we never do. And so I just think there's just comes a point where you say, like, do I really want to live this way? I mean, we have the midlife crisis, but do we have to wait until we're 45, 50 years old for that? Can we do that earlier? So I think that's, just really looking inside ourselves, and, and just saying, what's going, and what am I doing to myself if I'm not embracing a life of creative problem solving? Because I feel like, children are inherently that way, and there's an excitement and awe and wonder about the world. Again, I know there's, I don't want to say it's like this idyllic, childhood life. I mean, many of us had trauma and dealt with that, but they're, they're more inclined to embrace wonder and uncertainty than we are right now. So I just want to tap into that. And ultimately, it's like, I just think all of us are wired. I think we're all wired to be creative problem solvers, and that's something we talk about. That it's not a question of becoming a creative problem solver. It's realizing that you always have been. You're probably exercising it somewhere in your life right now that's safe. And can you expand that to all areas of your life? Knowing that becoming a creative problem solver not only makes you a better student, or makes your studies more enjoyable, not quite the word, more fulfilling, but also, it makes you a better employee or employer. But yeah, just life in general, just recapturing a wonder and excitement about life, I think that a lot of us aren't experiencing. So I don't want to say it's like becoming a creative problem solver all of a sudden makes your life just absolutely wonderful, but I think it makes it more engaging and exciting. And I think that's just a life that we all long for. So I don't know.
Lots of points of contact that I could follow up. I'm going to try to identify with our listeners. And so I think there are 2 questions that might come to mind. One is sort of, how did Loder come up with this model? What's the evidence, or is it based upon like a reading of experimental psychology? Is it introspection? And I can give you an example, I think, of a very concrete model in my field, or at least my original field, which is study of reading, that confirms this, for instance, the idea of the tacit dimension and our unconscious or out of conscious processing. But anyway, that's one question. Is, I think somebody will say, well, how did he come up with this model? Second is, while there's a lot of, the claim is mainly that there's a lot of naturalness to it, like we are problem solvers, we kind of get out of our own way, let go of things. but I at the same time, I think there are practical people who are going to say, but I want to intervene, not just let it happen. Is there some way that people can either create conditions that facilitate creative problem solving, or is there certain things that they can do intentionally above and beyond clearing the decks and creating conditions for our natural processes to operate?
Yeah, so for the first question about how he came up with this, I think it's important for me to say that Jim Loder was a theologian and a Christian theologian, and so the transforming moment. I hate to put it this way, but it has a bias. Let's say, like it is. There is a sense in which he is grappling with, okay, if Jesus Christ in one of the Gospels, book of John, talks about Jesus as the Logos, and so God is this creator, so that everything somehow reflects that creative bent. So he does weave that into his understanding of transformational logic. You don't have to buy that. I'm just saying, I just want people, if they're like running out to get this book and like, what is all this Christian stuff? I want them to be aware that that's what was going on. But it wasn't just something he dreamed up or came up with in his office. He was a practicing psychologist, and even when he was teaching at Princeton Seminary, he still had a practice. So I think a lot of it comes from his own experience and watching people grapple with this issue. And he saw that this rubric applied or over and over again in his practice. And then also just his study of Polanyi. Michael Polanyi was someone who was a Hungarian chemist who grew up during a time of communism and kind of the deterministic reductionistic view of science, and he really was grappling with that, and he really focused on the nature of discovery, and that's where he came up with this idea of the tacit dimension and its need in scientific discovery. And so I think Loder was putting his own psychological practice in all his study in psychology, theology, and scientific, history of science and all that work, not just with Polanyi, but others, and came up with this view of transformational logic. So that's that answer. To be honest, I never really talked about it with him. That like, where'd you come up with this? But that's my best guess. In terms of practical steps, yeah, I think there's a lot we can do to, I would say, develop this muscle. And I like that analogy. Like, it is kind of a muscle. It's a skill that it's not something we need to start doing. It's kind of there. We need to recognize it in ourselves, and then how do we give it what are the parameters or the environmental conditions, or whatever the conditions that will make it grow and thrive. So the first thing is recognize you are a creative problem solver, and I point to the fact of Piaget, that we make these cognitive leaps, and each of us does it, and each of those jumps was transformational logic, or the Loder rubric in action. And the fact that each of us has done it doesn't make it any less remarkable of an achievement in our own selves. So, just because everyone reads doesn't make it less remarkable that you learned how to read, right? I mean, it's amazing process. Like, our ability from light is reflected off this page or our screen, or the light's coming from the screen, and we take these dots and squiggly lines and somehow not only read it, but go beyond that. It becomes a world that we create. Like when we're reading fiction, we're kind of not, we're reading, but we're really involved in this world. I mean, that's incredible. And we just kind of say, well, I'm reading. It's like, well, no, like there's this process going on that's really, you just take a step back. Like, that's really awesome. So you have been a creative problem solver. You're probably doing creative problem solving somewhere in your life right now and just aren't aware of it. When we talked at high schools, I used to mention video games and I think we talked about, kids with skateboarding. Like, here's a world where they feel safe. They're trying to learn a new trick on a skateboard or on a surfboard or skiing or bike or whatever, or video games. At least, I know these are kind of male-oriented type
Not
of things.
necessarily, but yeah.
But even in video games, because I had two sons who would play a lot of video games, and it was amazing to see them. They would risk, but the risk was minimal. But they still had invested time. But they, and they would be killed off or whatever in the video game. But that was okay. They were still testing. They were trying things out, and they would be like, oh, what if I do this? So creative problem solving is going on right there. It was in this world where they were safe, they were engaged, they were invested, and so they're willing to make, to take risks, and when there was a cost, and to advance in the game. Now, we're like, okay, it's just a video game, but it does show that you are using creative problem solving there. And with students, when I worked at Princeton, I'd be like, okay, let's find, when we talked about this, I'd say, well, let's find a place where we're using creative problem solving. And it was fascinating. Some was like knitting, some was just music, creative writing, poetry, art.
On the soccer field,
the sports. Yeah, there's all these ways where you're just doing it and you just don't realize it. So I think it's so. You have done it, and you are doing it right now. The fact that you are doing, so that you can just at least say, oh, okay, I am a creative problem solver. I just do it in these certain environments. And so then what is it about that environment that makes it so you're willing to do it there? Like we said, it's really important to you. So you're willing to, like, that's one of those big things, right? These problems that come up are worth your attention and your time and your energy. So you'll give yourself to it. So so it's worth it. And you know that if you really want to advance and grow, you've got to make changes. So, like any athlete at the university level isn't saying no to their coach, I got this, like, they're willing to learn and to and listen and change in order to get better. So that's, they're willing to do that. Okay, so know that you have been, know that you are a creative problem solver, and where can you apply it elsewhere. But then again, looking at the conditions, you're heavily invested, so you're willing to invest your time. But then also there's other things just for creative problem solving in general. I mentioned like sleep. Seems trivial, but if I know if you read Matthew Walker's book,
I've read part of it. So I've skimmed it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it talks about the importance of REM sleep, and like your tacit dimension is still even working at that time, and so it's really important. But just creative problem solving is in the willpower needed to invest yourself is a limited resource. So if you're exhausted all the time, you're more inclined to fall back on what's easy or the path of least resistance. So you're less inclined to be a creative problem solver. So sleep's important, and I also think just if we are bombarding ourselves all the time with information, then it's really hard for our tacit dimension to do its work. So I would encourage students. I said, take the earpods out while you're walking to class, and just let your mind wander. Don't always have a podcast on. Don't always be ingesting social media. Give yourself time to just daydream, think, whatever, because it's seemingly wasted time, but your brain is using that. Like there's nothing unintentional going on. Like if you're daydreaming for a reason, or your mind is wandering for a reason. And I think that's, I would argue that it's because your tacit dimension is at work. So can you give it space? Can you give it time and kind of rest the brain so that it can do its work? And the classic example of that is the shower revelations that I talk about. Like a lot of people have their best thoughts or their aha moments in the shower. And I know I don't want to say this in a way that becomes a sexual innuendo or something weird, but when you're in the shower, usually your brain's kind of in neutral. hopefully don't have music going on or whatever. You're at it's a hot shower. You're relaxed. You're at peace, and there's reasons why we get good insights in the shower. And so, can we create those conditions or know those conditions so that we can maybe have them elsewhere during the day as well? So I don't know. That's kind of a rambling answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'd add one more thing. There's a lot of parallels between Jim Loder and my mentor, Marty Covington,
Right.
in a variety of ways. I think one of the differences is Marty's going to give gave a ultimately a psychological explanation in a way that Loder is seeking something else. Not to say that Marty is a human being, stop there, but as an empiricist, so one of the things I would say is you use some terms like, we have to be invested. It has to feel us, it's worth it to solve this problem. I think Marty would say that one of the ways to lose ourselves in the problem, to let go and lower the barrier that comes from hanging on to our identity, is to be intrinsically motivated in the activity. And now, in a way, then, that it's not worth it at all. That has nothing to do with it. Worth, relevance, utility has nothing to do with intrinsic. So there's a challenge there. I think he's a pragmatist and didn't believe that there was only intrinsic motivation, or that was the only good thing. But I think one thing from my practical point of view, in my own experience, introspecting on my own experience, is that for myself, I know a lot of times my creative thinking, my enjoyment, my process is much better if I consciously and intentionally frame what I'm doing as intrinsic to the task. If I think about its utility, for me, that often gets in the way, or its relevance, or the stakes. It makes me think about the stakes, and I get nervous. And that's my particular profile. But I think one thing I would say, as the practical psychologist in me, I think we can turn up intrinsic motivations. Harks back to a conversation we had, and if not turn down the fear or others, we can at least let them go a little bit. And then as we turn this up, they decrease in using this kind of balance model, their impact on us. And so I think that's an available tool as well to create conditions internally to engage creatively, and then with these outcomes.
No, that's a good. I think that's a good way to kind of round out or what I was saying, because I wasn't intending to say it's just the utility, but
yeah,
but I was definitely speaking in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. I think the intrinsic motivation, so that the activity itself is engaging. So I think that's great. Again, I think that gets down to I have to think about this more, but the awe and wonder, so that, like, instead of just like, okay, I gotta get through my physics problem set so that I get an A in this course and get that internship or whatever, versus, wow, this is really fascinating subject. Yeah. And I'm willing to just not only do the problem set, but perhaps even do more work. You're doing reading outside of that just because you're fascinated by the subject. Right. And I think it's a both and. It can be either or. It doesn't have to be, because there's times when you're going to have to, go through the drudgery because of the utility.
I mean, the premise of our book is it's not either or, and a lot of motivational psychologists think it is. However, I think a lot of people and a lot of students, without realizing it, are choosing either or, and they have something like eyes on the prize. The best way to solve this problem is to bang on it and stare at it as long as possible. And I think that the insight that undergirds this model, in particular the interlude for scanning, and then if we reflect on our own experience where problem solving has happened, we can see, no, that's not always the best way. Now, we have to invest or engage to a certain degree. We have to know enough. We have to have thought about it, internalize it, process probably. But there is an indirect route to the prize, so to speak, or to the solution. So sometimes I'll say not eyes on the prize, but eyes on the process, to bring us into the present moment, to be fully immersed. That the prize, if we take literally the metaphor of the prize is what you get after you're evaluated for turning in the work, after doing the work, and our attention outside the problem is itself part of the problem. We're thinking about that and not the physical principles of a spring, or what do I know about Newton's 3 laws that I can use. So that's even in a conscious way, right? Where does our attention lie? Where does our intention lie? But it's not that I don't understand those practicalities. I was a student. I face them all the time myself today. So it's not some sort of moral judgment. It's to say so the outcome of not thinking practically about the problem is quite practical, right? Like, try to let go of those immediate practical concerns and look for what's fascinating. Tap into the wonder, cultivate that. And that is actually a practical strategy too. Is it the only practical strategy? No. Is it the only strategy? No. I agree. In fact, but we live in a world. So I'm going to use this to say, I actually have to get to a meeting very shortly. So while we have much more to talk about, I have to end this conversation.
Okay. Well, let's just give final thoughts and then we'll get going.
Sure. I've given mine. You give yours.
Okay. Yeah, I think why I'm fascinated by this subject and really advocate it for others. One, just to go back, when we would give talks to high school, Nick and I would give talks to high schools, seniors especially, just to help them prepare or at least be aware of the issues that are going to face them in college, so they're not blindsided and they can maybe adapt and grow more quickly and not struggle as much or as long as they typically do. The creative problem solving was kind of like the one skill we felt like we could really help them, because if you can come to trust yourself, if you can come to have the self-esteem enough to say, I'm a creative problem solver, I can tackle this challenge, life to me just becomes more interesting, more engaging, the awe and wonder. And I just really want that for students. I want that for folks in the workplace, everyone. There's a joy that so many are missing out on because they just don't allow the way we are wired, see it as either be a creation or evolution, combination of both. We are creative problem solvers. We're meant to be creative problem solvers. And so it's by allowing us to be that life will be just more full of life versus this grind. Because even in the midst of the grind, amidst the struggle that we have, we can have this joy and wonder about life. I don't know, I'm kind of repeating myself, but anyway, I think it's just, it's important. It's an important skill. It's something I really hope people will embrace more, so that we're not catering to fears and anxiety and even despair. So with that, Nick, thanks so much. Good discussion.
Thank you, Matt.